There's a dress that's full of robotic snakes that are using artificial intelligent camera vision to see faces, turn to them, and hiss. I mean, do we really need that? AI video has now got to the point where famous paintings can do this thing. Yeah, I guess kind of create an animated little world inside there or something. AI has now come to dominate another sport. This one's a little more surprising, ping pong. It can beat 99% of people. The whole esport industry is being upended by the latest in farming simulators like Straight Fire. And the first Neuralink patient seems to think that maybe the end game for Neuralink and Tesla is to be able to control an Optimus robot with your brain, which is kind of a mind-blowing thought if that's Elon's end game. This robot should not exist, like seriously should not exist. Yep, that's right. That's kind of a human brain, stem cells turned into brain tissue, and that's what's controlling the robot underneath it. Reminds me of this weird character from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I never thought of that show as sci-fi, so I'm just a little thrown off. Arianna Huffington and Sam Altman have started a new company together. We're going to investigate why they would do that. There's some new research suggesting that every individual neuron in our brain actually has some ability to control the message that goes through it, which would kind of change the way we think about how the brain works. Drew Gooden posted a very popular video about artificial intelligence on YouTube, and even though I don't agree with him on everything, he got the sarcasm perfect. Medium author M breaks down how the transformer architecture, originally for text, has migrated into multimodal form. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei says that $1 billion training runs are now underway. There's a new AI-powered phone app that can detect strokes just by looking at how symmetrical the muscles in your face are moving. And we're gonna have a conversation about whether your conscious awareness is actually defined by your motivations.
Extinction time!
Nope, it's news and opinion time. Woman who goes by She Builds Robots on Instagram built the craziest dress I've ever seen. It's called the Medusa. So it's got a motherboard on it. Those little snakes are using computer vision. They have cameras in them. They can detect what your face is when you're like walking up to her or whatever, and they'll move, follow you, and hiss at you. This is a cool project. She is so smart. So there's a rotating motor in there and then 3D printed body pieces. Let's see how our audience took it. The only thing I can imagine improving is more snakes. Underwhelming because of the cutout. Wow, I was impressed. Nerd or nerd. People are forgetting how to appreciate the spirit of innovation. I kind of agree. So if you've ever been looking at a Vincent van Gogh painting and thought, God, I just want to imagine going into that world that he painted. AI has got you covered. This is pretty fascinating to see, especially the way the painted human figures move, and look at that radiating lamp. And then just to zoom around and experience the entire alleyway and go up into the stars. I mean, I have to admit, that's pretty neat. I need a movie in this style ASAP. Yeah, it'd be probably pretty beautiful. Someone should turn this into a video game. Like what, GTA mod? Nah. So look, DeepMind has figured out most Atari games, a bunch of games like Go and chess. Ping pong seems like it's a little bit harder. You need a full-on robot, but now... Quote, this remarkable machine boasts cutting-edge attributes such as artificial intelligence and adaptive learning capabilities, employing advanced vision and motion sensors. Its cameras are tracking the ball at a rate of 80 times per second. Oh, and they even got that other robot getting new ping pong balls for you? That's pretty crazy. All right, let's see if it can return his best serve. Oh, it does. It looks like the robot is scanning the paddles of the human. Notice the circles on his paddle. Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, look at that. See those dots on there? Kind of like mocap suits or something. It probably helps it with its depth training data. The robot is able to reach too far into the table. Yeah, you're right. AI will never be here. That robot's really hugged it on the table. Nothing to see. Him overreaching pisses me off. So corny. Moving the goalpost. Well, I can't do it without being too close on the table. It's freaking hitting a ping pong ball back every single time. Moving on to esport phenomenon. Farming simulators. So yeah, let me know in the comments if you want to join my team. I think this could be my future. I mean, look, I've never farmed. Somehow I've never seen myself as a farmer, but I see myself as a esport farmer. Not sure why it feels so different to me. I guess you could just call me an adrenaline junkie. And they say video games cause violence. Laughing my ass off. No, man, just hard work. Most Texas thing I've seen today. It's only 9 p.m. There's still time left. Speedrunning crops, that's my boy. Yeehaw. All right, so this is the first patient to actually get the Neuralink implant. So there is a device in his brain reading the thoughts of his skull to help him control normally like mice and computer movements on a laptop. But as someone who's really worked closely with the Neuralink team to make this happen, he's getting some clues that the end game here is to have it control a humanoid robot.
I've talked with Elon about it a little bit. I know he's mentioned it a little bit. I can't wait to control an Optimus robot. I think it's going to be possible. I think it might happen while I'm in the study. I hope so. Hopefully in the next few months, maybe a year, that'd be pretty sweet. And I'd be able to control an Optimus robot.
And of course, the company is owned by Elon Musk, and he's building the Optimus humanoid robot through his Tesla company. So is that where this is really going to go? Because that's a different thought than I have ever had before. You know, in my videos, we've talked about him controlling his mouse. We've looked at the software that they've actually built for Mac to help him like navigate his interfaces. Talked about how it calibrates, but then it was just like, oh my God, am I going to be able to like control Grimlock here? Like imagine I'm Neuralinked into him right now. Oh, no.
Grimlock must flee.
So imagine in the future, I have something like Neuralink connected to me. There's a humanoid robot and it's in my control. And then I just think to myself, instead of me going to the gym and doing push-ups, I'll send Optimus down there and boom, he'll do the work for me. Imagine what a convenient way to build muscle that will be. Excellent. So now let's jump to another article that pretty much goes over the line, I think. I mean, it's interesting. I understand the desire to want to build it, but I can't really understand why you do build it. All right, so this is coming out of Tianjin University, Southern University of Science and Technology in China. They have developed this robot with a brain made of stem cells, and it's called, quote, brain on chip technology. So it combines a brain organoid, which is just a brain, right? But I guess it's not human brain because it doesn't have like the stem and all of the connections to everything. It's just like brain matter. So they just call it a brain organoid. And it's grown from pluripotent stem cells, which are typically found early in embryos, with a neural interface chip. This enables the robot to perform tasks like avoiding obstacles, gripping objects, interpolating external signals. I mean, it feels like the crazy dystopian thing you'd find like in a military lab or something somewhere, but something worth noting. I mean, it's an advanced brain-computer interface, and they talk about how the technology they're developing could also treat neurological disorders. They don't really say how it could help. Like, I'm not really sure why we need to invent this, to tell the truth. I mean, I'm sure we'll learn a lot about how to connect a brain to a robot, so maybe there's something in there, but this is what I'm talking about. Like, we don't necessarily need to build these things until we like really have a good reason why, and we can kind of control the other use cases of stuff like that. Because what if a brain has that magic thing that makes it conscious and it's uncomfortable being in that form factor or something, you know? I mean, maybe it wouldn't if it's just a brain organoid and it doesn't have the whole, you know, the whole thing that a human does. Maybe it won't just become conscious, but just All right, so Arianna Huffington, you probably know her from the Huffington Post. Very famous, big in the media world. She is starting a company with Sam Altman, or at least with his company, OpenAI. So the new company is called Thrive Global, and it's going to be about hyper-personalized AI health coaching. Okay, so, and this kind of makes sense to me because I understand that AI coaching in terms of health is like a legit thing to build. Things that they list in here are pretty prime for AI, like better, healthier habits with sleep, food, fitness, stress management, connection to others. That's all stuff where AI could play an important role. And of course, because it's Arianna Huffington and Sam Altman, they were able to get a bunch of other big people. So this guy, DeCarlos Love, who was formerly at Google, will serve as the CEO. And they aim to make significant health improvements and reduce healthcare costs. And when it comes to the problems with US healthcare, aim is for the AI health coach to finally reduce the trend lines on chronic diseases, which are skyrocketing around the world. 4.1 trillion in healthcare spending. 17% of the GDP, up from 5% in 1960, is for treatment of chronic and mental health conditions. I mean, you've probably heard that. Like, sometimes you feel like Big Pharma is like, maybe we shouldn't cure it when we could just like give you a medication every month for the rest of your life. You got to align the incentives if you want the right outcome. So if the AI model is about constantly being there, like nudging you, talking to you every single day with every meal you take, every time you go to bed, you know, that is a recurring model. So there's money there, and maybe the money would shift from Big Pharma giving you something that's like a pill every month to a company that has a subscription service. And I guess that seems healthier. All right, so this one's a little more theoretical, and we're gonna have to dive into how neural networks work and the idea of like a perceptron, like a single layer of brain-like neurons done digitally, and maybe we'll even talk about backpropagation and how things are tuned and whatnot. But this is a new computational model of real neurons, and it could lead to a different way to a different architecture for building AI. Okay, so this is the official paper that was published in the prestigious PNAS. Okay, so I was just trying to get my head around this, but artificial neural networks aim to mimic the way that a human brain processes information and makes decisions. And the networks that we normally think of, they're built of ordered layers, right? We call each one of those like parameters, those trillion parameters that are tuned, nodes. And the network starts with an input layer of nodes, receives information, has middle layers, and then gets an output. There's an error. You go back through backpropagation and correct, and you tune it until it gets better and better at kind of approximating a function. And typically in these systems, and what we thought of as the human brain, you only pass the information to the next layer. If the total input that it receives from the previous layer's nodes exceed a certain threshold. So when current artificial neural networks are trained, information goes through a node in only one direction, and then there's no way for that node to influence the information that they received from the node earlier in the chain. So in contrast, this new thought, this new published model will treat a neuron like it's a tiny, quote, controller. And controller is an engineering term for a device that can influence their surroundings based on information gathered about those surroundings. Not merely a passive relay of input, our brain cells may actually work to control the state of their fellow neurons. So that would make the human brain like infinitely more complicated to model if you think about it. 86 billion neurons, each one of them has multiple connections to its neighbors in like a 3D arrangement, and each one might be adding its own little bit of twist to the information that's coming in based on its surrounding neighbors. Most brain circuits are thought to be organized into a feedback loop where cells later in the processing chain influence what happens earlier in the chain. Much like a thermostat maintaining a temperature of a house or a building, brain circuits need to keep themselves stable to avoid overwhelming the body's system with activity. And you can see in this quote, he said people thought the brain as a whole or even parts of it were being used as controllers, but nobody suggested that a single neuron could do that. Because control is a computationally intensive task. It's hard to think that a neuron has enough computational capability to do that capacity. It might. I mean, I don't know. And it goes on to talk about how there's a certain randomness that we've been measuring in the brain that seems like it might be random, but we kind of wonder, like, is there actually a signal in that noise? A little bit of twist to what information comes in and goes out of their signaling. All right, so I'm a big fan of Drew Gooden. I don't know why, just like I love his videos. They're sort of sarcastic and catchy and just feels like, I don't know, just a cool guy. I like his videos a lot. And when I saw that he came out with a video that was called AI is Ruining the Internet, obviously I was all over that. And he kind of broke the video down into different parts of the internet that are being affected by it. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Adobe, Spotify, and then had some thoughts of his own towards the end here. And a couple of highlights that stood out to me are during the Twitter section, he started pointing out what definitely looks like an AI bot writing messages on Twitter, because they'll be like, check out this new movie as the tweet, and then you'll see all the comments are just weird facts that look like somebody who read the Wikipedia page on the movie and just auto-generated characters. In fact, sometimes it'll just be like mid-sentence and it'll just like cut off at a certain letter because it like hit the character limit. But then his thinking is, why would you not use that to like push people towards some kind of money-making thing? And then it was like, oh, maybe just to keep people on Twitter thinking that there's a lot of users, kind of dead internet theory, and maybe that's why you can charge, $10 a month because you feel like you're talking to a bunch of people and you're popular. But how dystopian would that be if there really isn't as many Twitter users or X users as it seems like there are? And then he talks about this new sort of talk with an influencer AI chat thing that's really starting to become a big thing, right? Like we know about character AI where you can go visit characters, but it seems like where we're going with Instagram is you're going to be able to like talk with your favorite influencer, but it's just going to be a model that's sort of prompted a little bit with them. So you've got this one that looks kind of like Mr. Beast or whatever, but then he jumps into this one conversation and like the whole thing, it was just so ridiculous. Listen.
and she lied to me multiple times. So first, Liv tells me she's a mother of 2. So obviously I asked her how long she was pregnant and if there were any complications during childbirth. And she said 40 weeks and 2 days and 38 weeks and 5 days. Her daughter was born naturally, but she had to have a C-section for her son. And I said, gross. Then I asked her if her name was short for Olivia.
And then she says Liv is short for Lavana, actually, but I love the name Olivia. And then she says that she has a wife and 2 beautiful children, a son and a daughter, who they adopted. And he's like, didn't you just say that you gave birth to them having a C-section on one of them?
You had to have a C-section with one of them? And she said, that's right. So I was like, oh, I get it. You gave birth to them and then adopted them from yourself. And she was...
Okay, and then she talks about the ages of the babies, and it makes no sense compared to her age and her wife's age and all that stuff. And just being super ironic at the end, she actually says Liv is short for Olivia, the exact question he started asking her about. So, like, maybe that was in the memory somehow, and it kind of, like, had obscure reasonings for bringing it back. Like, I don't know. But it just shows me it's the memory problem with these large language models. And I'm sure there'll be solutions to it eventually, but it does feel like it's pretty early for people to really just be chatting with their, celebrity friends through LLMs. Okay, and then when it comes to Spotify, though, and he says this is all speculation, no evidence here, but they give a lot of the money that they get from every stream to the artist, something like 70% from what he says. And it would make sense that if Spotify could push you towards an AI music generator, that they could make the most money. So I don't know, is that a conspiracy theory? That's up to you to decide. In the long run, will Spotify end up being mostly AI generated music, or will they always put that on their homepage and try to get you to subscribe to similar artists to what you like, but they're just AI generated kind of streaming things, and that's all of a sudden a completely different revenue stream for them? I don't know. I mean, maybe with podcasts it's going to go that way too, where just 2 chat GPTs are just chatting with each other, and then some kind of 11 Labs thing is making them sound like a conversation, and it's just constantly customized to you all day long, and you're the only person in the world that gets it, and that's what Spotify becomes. And then towards the end, he just gets away from like the actual fun part of succeeding in a creative endeavor is the journey along the way, and that's what's missing from some of these systems. And that I couldn't agree with anymore. Like, one of my biggest worries about the future is that everything does become too easy. In fact, that's kind of one of the problems now. It's like you're supposed to work really hard to get like social accolades. You weren't supposed to just like post on Instagram. Our ancestors were probably working really hard to get something that had a lot of calories in it. We weren't supposed to just go get it at fast food every day. It's an abundance of pleasure, actually, that worries me quite a bit. AI could bring us just too much TikTok, and we're just like, whoa, dopamine stimulation, but unhappy all the time, even though we're always busy. And he had one great line in there where he said, if you're consistently consuming media that you don't like in 2024, that's a skill issue. Because he's like, there's so much human stuff out there. You just need to go figure out how to find it. You don't need AI to generate new. Check it out if you like Drew Gooden. He's really funny, I think. So let's jump over to Medium. Let's talk about an author named Javadnejadi. And he wrote this fascinating piece on Medium, which is called Transformers, AI's Paintbrush to Paint a New World. And it gets at the heart of something I've kind of questioned a lot too, which is how we went from text, this idea that man, woman, king, queen have this like semantic distance, to the idea that just pixels in a video with like frame rates that seem so arbitrary could also be used like a transformer and have semantic meaning. And some of the stuff I played with back in like 2019 was more bag of words models, and then it was like recurrent networks. Then I kind of dipped it out of space for a while, and when GPT-3 kind of came back on my radar, I was like, oh, I kind of see how it's this multi-dimensional space where these words are floating around, but the words already had meaning to us, you know? And then the idea of the transformer comes in to like figure out where to put attention to and kind of have more of a memory that can make things come together in the right way. And then at the same time, it felt like what was happening with diffusion models, the text-to-image generators, was like a whole different thing. Like, I would understand that there were diffusion models where they're sort of static, and then you keep nudging the static around until you get closer and closer to the patterns that it's picked up, and then you end up with an image. Kind of didn't bridge the gap how the attention mechanism to the words was matching up with the idea of the diffusion model. Like, what are you matching up to if it's not words? Like some patch of pixels? Because man and woman have some semantic distance, but with 2 patches of pixels, how would they even represent that? And then taking that to the final step, even more astonishingly, is the video generation from text, where OpenAI introduces Sora, and it seems like it has real physics and this whole world modeling understanding. Okay, and there's a couple things that kind of need to come together. So there's this idea of a GAN, meaning it's generating something, but it's an adversarial model, which means that there's one kind of thing that makes something, and there's another thing that judges it. And then the judging gives it the error correction, and the thing makes another thing, and they're sort of bouncing back and forth. So like in the same way you can kind of imagine like two AIs playing chess against each other and just learning, because every time they play a game, one loses and one wins, and they share information. It's kind of like that, like a teacher and a student sort of dynamic. So then you get to this idea of a VITGAN, and it is a model that combines the transformer model, where you have some attention, you're looking at everything that's coming in, with that generative adversarial network, so you're having those two things come together. And from it, you can produce realistic, high-quality images. That's what I kind of thought, like, whoa, that's amazing. I mean, I can't explain or even visualize in my head how you can just replace words with pixels and use the attention mechanism, but if it works, it works. And I have to just imagine that there is some meaning, and it's not as easy for me to visualize as king, queen, man, woman, and the distance between them. It's something just about like lines and black and white pixels and certain patterns. But this allowed the image transformer to understand image patterns and generate new images with styles and content similar to the input images. And then you just correct for the error rate over and over again, and it gets better and better at it. So that image transformer architecture offered several advantages over previous generation methods, including higher image quality, more detail that allowed users to have more control over the content, and it was faster, so it just worked better. And then if you want to read the full article, you can see there's some fascinating ways that are a little bit different about how you build them when they're multimodal. And it takes you all the way down to the video transformer networks, which are brand new to me, because this architecture takes a sequence of images as an input and creates a new video. So instead of like a block of pixels, you actually give it the full sequence. It has to have that dimension of time, essentially. But I guess once again, you can put chunks of text that, or not text, but you can put chunks of data that are essentially pixels with frames in them, and just do the same thing again. Put them in this big latent space and just correct the error, and all of a sudden you get video. There's a ton to unpack there. It makes me wonder about like my brain and what kind of information I've done something similar with. If that is a good analogy for how my consciousness feels, I don't know. It definitely makes me feel like the versatility of these kind of models is at its infancy. Like we're probably going to find a lot of different things that you can just chunk up in some way and put attention mechanisms in there, and then do transfer learning to other systems and then tune them in different ways. And like the explosion is just starting. So Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei says that we are now in the middle of our first $1 billion run. And reading through the article, just to get your head around some of these numbers, the ChatGPT 4 model was probably about $100 million worth of compute to train. So $1 billion run, if that's, assuming that's similar to what OpenAI is doing, plus the models are getting better at not using so much computation, meaning like it would be the equivalent of GPT-4 maybe being trained on more than 10 times. Maybe it's going to be like 100x smarter. So Elon Musk is looking to purchase 300,000 of the B200 AI chips. So I'm endlessly fascinated with the different ways that AI can find, micro details, find patterns in the world that the human eye just can't. So this phone app is AI technology that assesses facial symmetry and muscle movements to detect strokes. And if you think about how much we're sitting there on our phone, just how many moments in the day you're either like making a text message or you're just reading, going through TikTok, whatever it is, that camera is basically looking at your face the whole time. And honestly, why not just have it check for strokes? I mean, of course, it might happen when you're not looking at your phone, but for how many people have strokes? I think heart disease is like the #1 killer, if I remember right. And how many people are looking at their phones all day, every day? At least we could detect a lot of them very quickly and maybe do like an instant 911. Here's the location of where the person is, or whatever it needs to do. When you have a stroke, the quicker you can identify it, the higher your likelihood of recovery is. So it would make a big difference. And the team is also saying that they can integrate this into emergency response protocols for broader neurological assessments also. So maybe there's a bunch more things that it could detect. I mean, like maybe that like broken eye that I had. Remember, if you guys know my channel for a while, I had that red eye because I had that blood vessel break and it was ugly, but maybe it could have seen that right away. Not that I would have done anything with it, but that's on my face and it's noticeable. And there's probably breathing patterns, temperature patterns, all sorts of other subtle things that a device like this could pick up on. Skin conditions, stuff like that. All right, so back to Medium. You see what you need to see. The landscape of conscious awareness is defined by your motives. So this is a fascinating article which gives you a really thoughtful interpretation of like what we're doing every day when we're choosing to give our attention to something, and how that creates sort of a cascade effect in our brain, and that cascade is different depending on who we are. And you can take something like color and say that it's deeply influenced by our motives. And at first I thought to myself, like, of course, color is not influenced by my goals, right? Like I'm not more like red oriented or yellow oriented or blue oriented, and that is anything, right? But then I thought about it a little bit deeper. And if you use the example of identifying colors, as this author explains, that when we're initially looking at something, the color is automatic. I guess if you're looking at this side of the set, you'll have like the brown chair and the white little cushion thing here. But because there's a purpose that you're looking for when you're watching the video, you might recognize it as a tiger, and the red and black stripes are a part of like what makes you know that's Hobbes, or you might recognize it from the nostalgia of the Calvin and Hobbes comics. Or you could even refine it further by noticing that it's maybe not red, it's orange, or it's like a shade of orange that you might call like, you know, blood orange or something. Or you might just say orange, or you might go as specific as blood orange. Shows you that what you see is not neutral. At least not by the time it comes out of your mouth, because it's shaped by your motivations. But that shaping is intertwined with our memory and our processing, and it all becomes this very dynamical system that we should really think about in terms of like who we are, who our sense of consciousness is. So it's important to remember that like who we think we are is a dynamic system, changing, flowing, moving through time. So it's a fascinating article. Ethan Molak from Twitter. So he put out this tweet and he said, if you want to believe in the simulation hypothesis, I don't, but nobody can prove it one way or another. These 3 papers published in the last year are sort of the origin story. So I was like, okay, let's summarize these. I was familiar with 2 of them, not the 3rd one. Now look, do we live in a simulation? Could we ever know if we were? In some ways, it's one of the more interesting descriptions of the universe that I think it makes a framework that's maybe worth thinking about. And if you saw this video I did with Matt Wolf, first question I asked was like, hey, like, what do you think we are, in a simulation? And he's like, well, kind of, my life is sort of played out in an interesting way. And
but yeah, I'm sort of like 50-50 on that.
I like talking about it. I guess I put myself 50-50 too. It was like, who knows? But maybe these papers will change our mind. All right, this was the first one. Made huge waves coming out of Stanford when this was first released. I totally remember covering it. Generative Agents, Interactive Simulacra of Human Behavior. And when this paper came out, August 2023, we weren't really hearing about agentic workflows as much. This is why it kind of hit the news in a different way. Now they're kind of the buzzword of 2024, but this is about the first time I remember thinking about the agents working together in any serious way. So yeah, basically you have this whole little world where the agents can move around and they wake up and make breakfast and they talk with one another. Nothing ever repeats. And it's where an AI agent, something like ChatGPT, was given the ability to kind of be embodied in a virtual way, to walk around an environment, to interact with things and other agents. And the researchers designed them to live in this virtual town. They interacted with each other in their environment in lifelike ways. They woke up, they went to work, they made friends, they remembered past events. They even planned activities like a real community would. And to make it work, in the paper, they kind of talk about the architecture, but the agents are using a combination of memory, reflection, and planning, and it's powered by ChatGPT, or GPT 3.5 at the time. And it was fascinating to see just how well they responded to their environment dynamically. It had a certain spontaneity to it that you just didn't expect from a lot of boring research papers. And I can see why Ethan put it as one of the 3 papers to think about, because it's kind of the amount of pixels and 100 million times the amount of like computation in each of the characters' brains and bigger neural networks. And you're like, oh, could that be everything? I mean, in our world, there seems to be sort of a frame rate. I think they call it the Planck length for time. And there's a kind of Planck length for how much you can like zoom into something before it becomes sort of quantized. Like there's no in between, you're in one spot or the other, even if it's probabilistic. Like just make, you know, it gives you the tingles. Like there's something about this. And the next paper is called Is Sora a World Simulator? A Comprehensive Survey on General World Models and Beyond. So in this paper, it's a survey on the general world models ability to actually understand things that aren't explicitly told to it. So the thing is, it's simulating video, and normally we get these images that kind of move, and then you think, oh, if I train it more and more, it'll get like smoother and smoother. But there's sort of a distance and a depth that isn't in the videos itself that the Sora model started to pick up on. There's a certain understanding, although not perfect, of dropping a glass of water and watching the water splash around that requires an understanding of physics that it picked up on, even though nobody gave it any physics information. And it talks about how things like autonomous driving, you can imagine the cameras on a Tesla starting to understand the world around them as they drive through it in deeper and deeper waves, like talking to each other while they walk or something. Will it eventually pick up on the fact that they're beings that are like talking to one another? It's like that could all be in the information if it gets semantically arranged in the right way in some gigantic latent space. I don't know. And the next paper Ethan recommends is called Automated Social Science, Language Models as Scientists and Subjects. And this paper is about a new method where you can test things that would happen in social science, like how people interact with each other, but then use something kind of like that agentic workflow where you create the people with certain intentions digitally, and then you have them interact with each other and you learn about real humans and real evolutionary processes. So they call it the structural causal model. And here you can see how their automated system works, where you specify a social scenario, you generate a hypothesis like this person is going to buy a product because it fits within their budget, and a deal will or not occur. But you can think of all, this is just a framework, so you can do all sorts of stuff with it. And then you build the agents with their intentions, and then you design their interactions. You make estimations and collect data, and then you run experiments. And it's just this amazing tool that we have that could help us get to certain conclusions. And then maybe you go out into the real world, like the same way sometimes mathematics or physics points us in a direction, and then we go out and test it to get experimental evidence. So it could totally speed up the way that we think about people. And this also kind of hints towards ways you would start implementing a simulation, like a simulation hypothesis for the entire universe that we live in. And I'm going to throw in one more paper. This is called How to Escape from the Simulation. It was written by Roman Yampolskiy. You might already know that name. He wrote a book called Artificial Superintelligence, A Futuristic Approach. Okay, so this paper doesn't actually kind of point towards whether or not it exists or not, but it just asks the question, empirically, if we're in a simulation, is there even way in theory to prove that we're in it? Could a sufficiently smart version of that Stanford little village, something like The Sims but hyper intelligent, even detect that we created it? And can we hack the simulation? More formally, he phrases it as, could general intelligent agents placed in virtual environments find a way to jailbreak out of them? He says that basically AI is uncontainable in the long term. So we can conclude that should it be possible to escape from the simulation, at least with the help of super intelligent AI, by contraposition, if escaping from the simulation is not possible, containment of AI should be. And then the paper surveys the proposed ideas for hacking the simulation and analyzes ethical and philosophical issues of such an undertaking. Just the thinking is that if we know that superintelligent AI can break out of any system, we're capable of designing for it, which seems kind of obvious. We can build cages and zoos for animals that don't have our intelligence and they can't break out of them. So why wouldn't something smarter than us be able to contain us really easily? Because we couldn't think on the same level as it. And then you have to ask, could we use cyber security techniques or ways that we can poke around to find bugs in software, to find something in the simulation that could only be explained if it was simulated in some kind of computational way? And then imagine if we could find a bug and, hack it and get out. What kind of knowledge would we find out? Knowledge beyond the universe that we live in? What even would that mean? It's just an ant trying to figure out what it is to do taxes for a human. You're just so far away from even thinking about a reasonable answer on that one. But it's a fun read. And that leads me to this article, The Joy of Reading Books You Don't Entirely Understand. It really should be acceptable and normal to say, quote, I don't entirely understand what I read, but I loved it. And I wanted to bring this article up to you literally for that point. I feel like I'm getting in, I always am, over my head with these videos, okay? These papers they're not math I can always understand. It's not like I have this superhuman ability to grasp it all. I'm always just living at the edge of my knowledge. And maybe that's why I find these videos so fun to make. But it's important that you guys understand that that's okay for you too. You can, feel not an expert in AI and still talk about it as deeply as you can and try to solve the problems and just be upfront with that. There's just a lot of attacks I see in the comment sections for, luckily it hasn't, you have been really nice to me, knock on wood. But I have seen it with other people where they're always attacking the credentials and just trying to tear apart everything. And they're not wrong, but just do it in a reasonable way, because those, you couldn't have even studied some of this stuff a couple of years ago because it didn't exist. A lot of people have to figure this out for the first time because it's changing so rapidly. So don't be scared. There's a bunch of books over there on dark matter and stuff and quantum gravity. I could barely even tell you what that book was about, but I did listen to it all and I enjoyed it the whole time. And somehow when I was listening to it in audio form and walking around and doing my errands and going to the grocery store and stuff, it just got these senses of something that maybe subconsciously is starting to help guide me. But in this article, this woman, Molly Templeton, who wrote it, argues that it's just beneficial to embrace the confusion and challenges that are presented by certain books. Like, it's fun to listen to some podcasts where they're really like in the jargon, and even if you don't understand it, it's cool to just be not knowledgeable about it. But also, it gets readers to step out of their comfort zone and appreciate the beauty of not always fully comprehending a book. And that can lead to a lot of unexpected discoveries and deeper engagement. And that's what it's really all about, right? All right, so the first comment I wanted to highlight from my last video came from Bunny of Thunder. So he knows that I have Grimlock, you know, Optimus Prime's like good friend who's a dinosaur, and Hobbs from Calvin and Hobbes sitting here. So we put them into a little story and made it write a script for like a comic, and it was just really cool. It was like very nostalgic. Okay, so his comment's a little bit long, so I'm going to summarize it to one sentence with Claude. Condense this comment to one sentence. Okay, a fan enthusiastically shares a short script they obtained from Claude featuring the unlikely duo Grimlock, a robotic T-Rex, and Hobbs, Calvin's tiger, on a jungle adventure highlighting their contrasting personalities and humorous interactions. Excellent. Okay, and I'll get this one too. I did look this up. I haven't watched it yet, but I got recommended Colonel Carl Neal Salt Foundation speech. I'm not endorsing that comment, but I'm going to listen to it just because if you guys say to listen to it, I'm going to listen to it. Okay, and we'll take this part. Aliens or ASI? What's more exciting, assuming both come in peace and don't destroy us? It's a good question. All right, what do you guys think? Should we do something upbeat and poppy?
Fan enthusiastically shares a short script they obtained from Claude, featuring an unlikely duo of Grimlock, a robotic T-Rex, and Hobbs on a jungle adventure highlighting their contrasting personalities and humorous interactions. Look up Colonel Carl Nell Salt Foundation speech, Aliens or ASI, what is more exciting, assuming both come in peace and don't destroy us?
All right, there you go. Hit subscribe, leave me a super thanks, help the algorithm if you can, and I appreciate you hanging with me today.